We're very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Lyanda Lynn Haupt. Lyanda Lynn Haupt is an author, speaker, and naturalist based in Seattle. She has created and directed educational programs for Seattle Audubon, worked in raptor rehabilitation in Vermont, and as a seabird researcher for the Fish and Wildlife Service in the remote tropical Pacific. Her writings have appeared in numerous publications, including Image, Open Spaces, Wild Earth, Conservation Biology Journal, Birdwatchers Digest, and The Prairie Naturalist. She is the author of 3 books: Rare Encounters with Ordinary Birds, a winner of the 2002 Washington State Book Award; Pilgrim on the Great Bird Continent, The Importance of Everything and Other Lessons from Darwin's Lost Notebooks. And she is here to talk about her new book, Crow Planet: Essential Wisdom from the Urban Wilderness. Start out and tell us, what was the motivation in writing your new book, Crow Planet?
Well, it's a funny question. People ask me that, and I didn't actually start out to write a book about crows. I had a completely different idea in mind, but the editor of my first book, the local editor, Gary Luke at Sasquatch Books, suggested when I was writing Rare Encounters that I add a crow chapter. And I said, no, I did not want a chapter about crows. I'd already written about starlings, which I thought was another really ubiquitous, super urban, ultra common bird. And that was enough of that kind of bird for that book. Even though they're different, crows are a native bird and starlings aren't. But I just thought, I wanted to write about more wild birds. And Gary Luke really insisted. And so I thought, gosh, I wasn't sure what I was going to say because everything else I had written about in that book, I had written about because I wanted to. I had some ideas about the birds and people that I was writing about. So I started asking my friends about crows. And I have to tell you, Mike, I have never been so startled in asking people about a bird. I mean, think about it. If you ask someone what they think of a chickadee, what are they going to say? Cute. I mean, what do you have to say about a chickadee or a robin or any of the other birds that we're familiar with? Or even something big like an eagle. It's just, beautiful, rare, whatever. But if you ask someone about a crow, the reactions that you get are just really deep. People on one side of the spectrum will talk about how much they hate crows, about how they're this poopy, kind of evil pestilence on the city. And if you think about it, evil is a word I have heard used in conjunction with crows several times. And it's an unusual word to use in conjunction with a bird, right?
Yeah.
I mean, lots of words for birds. Evil is a telling one about our perceptions of crows. On the other side, you have people that are absolutely rapturous about crows. They're beautiful, they're intelligent, they're iridescent, they love them, they dream about them, and of course there's a middle ground as well. But it seems that no matter what people think of crows, there's also that feeling that crows demand a kind of respect, that they have an intelligence that we know is uncommon in birds, and that we see them sitting there, we know that they are themselves knowing things. So I thought, oh my gosh, there is really something going on here. And so I had a lot of fun writing that chapter. And then I went on and wrote the book about Darwin, again, not thinking about crows. But the editor had asked me again, how about a book about crows? And it was kind of, for me, I just thought, no. I wrote the chapter. It was fun. I'm done. Went on writing about Darwin. But it's one of those things, I don't know, when people tell you, don't think about elephants, and you can't. So all the time, this really interesting crow research was piling up on my desk. Injured crows started showing up on my doorstep. I mean, just all these things. I thought, this is crazy. But the one thing, it just started to become inevitable that I would write about crows. And the one thing that really interested me in them was that I saw them as a natural connector to everyday wildlife, and I wanted to make that connection in the book. But I still think that the book would have been very different if another thing hadn't happened in my life, something that apparently didn't have to do with crows at all. And that is, we moved from our little tiny, teeny house in West Seattle, just a few miles away, to a bigger, old 1920s farmhouse in West Seattle. And it's not on a farm. It's surrounded by little houses, very much an urban neighborhood. And the reason that matters is that I have spent my whole life working as a naturalist, and I always envision, getting to know the natural world around me, working with birds. I always thought that I would live in and raise my daughter in some kind of more rural area, that we'd have meadows surrounded by woodlands, we'd have a cow, just all of that. And so when we bought our second house in the city, it just started to feel this urban existence started to feel really, really permanent to me. And it was tied into my husband's work. He does AIDS education work globally with the UW, and it's good work, so that's why we're here. Um, but I just really fell into this period of deep melancholia over, you know, we have this dissonance sometimes in our lives over what our dreams are and what the reality turns out to be. And so I was hanging out in my pajamas, not getting out of bed, all the things that depressed people do. And one morning after my husband and daughter left for school and work, I heard this incessant crow outside my study window, just caw, caw, caw. And I just thought, what is it doing? I pulled the covers over my head and tried to go back to sleep, but it just kept on for half an hour. And finally, I thought, for goodness sake, I got up and went out and tapped on the window. And the crow looked up at me. And I swear, Mike, it looked like it was saying, "Ha, I got her up." And I just thought, it's kind of anthropomorphizing, but that was the look on its face. And it stopped cawing and it turned to preening its feathers, just using its bill to fluff its feathers and pull out any little, parasites or bugs. And I just thought, all right. I pulled out my notebook and started taking down notes on this crow and making some sketches sitting up on the desk. And I finally thought to myself, all right, what is it that I really want? What is it that I think that I'm missing? I mean, here I am in the city. I'm as much an introduced species as any Norway rat. And here in front of me is this beautiful, intelligent, native, wild bird that if I studied it my whole life, I would still just scratch the surface of what there is to know. And so in that moment, my vision for about crows and my sense about this emerging book shifted. And crows became not just the subject of my study, but a guide, in a sense, to inhabiting this urban place that I live more graciously and more attentively. Kind of a long answer for you.
No, and that comes out immediately in your book, talking about the how many of us get into the thinking that nature is something you drive, X number of miles to go
Right.
be in.
Right. We often think of nature as sort of the capital N, nature out there. It's someplace you go to in a car, right? You strap on your hiking boots and you pack food and water, and off you go and you experience nature. And then you come home, if traffic wasn't too bad, refreshed and happy from your time in nature. And then it's back to the bus and the job. And we hear a lot of talk about, I don't want to belittle our efforts to get away from, the crowds and go out into what less trammeled wilderness. I think that it's absolutely essential and restorative for us to have such experiences, and we strive to get them in my family all the time. But I think setting up that dichotomy between the places where we live and what nature is a tricky one. Um, I guess the idea is that we hear a lot about ecological thinking and ecosystemic thinking now, right? But what defines an ecosystem is the intricate exchange of energy and resources through the organisms and the natural forces in the place, in the geographical location of the ecosystem. And so what makes us ecosystemic creatures is not those times that we're hiking in the woods that we drove our, Volkswagen out to, but it's the way that we dwell in the places that we live, the way we eat and choose our food, the way we choose our water, and where it comes from and where it goes when we're done with it, where our garbage goes, how we compost, how we drive, um, what we grow, it's all of these things, how we treat and interact with the more than human world around us. This is what makes us part of an ecosystem. And so our deepest connection to nature is not when we're, sitting on top of the mountain thinking, "Oh my goodness, this is absolutely beautiful." But it's when we're in our homes eating pizza. That's what connects us most deeply. to nature, those choices that we make. And so I love the idea that when we pay attention to the natural, to the more than human world around us every day, and crows are just one bold, visible way to start accessing that, it can help us to think about these connections between our homes and that outward sensibility from our homes to the close to home wild and to the really far flung essential wilderness. It's all connected.
So, in a sense, these crows are diplomats from the world of nature to all of us.
I like that. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, envoys or guides in a way. And I don't mean it in the really, I mean, many people do find a type of spiritual guide in the crow, and I appreciate that. But for me, I'm just talking about maybe more in an everyday sense. They're a window into seeing and appreciating the everyday fact of our connection with the more than human world. Because crows are really, I mean, crows are a good starting point. They're really bold, they're really obvious, they're always doing something interesting that we don't expect a bird to be doing. I think a lot of crows are doing more interesting things than a lot of my friends and even myself at certain parts of the day. So they're easy to watch, right? They're easy access. But I don't think they're an ending point. I think they're an invitation to realize, gosh, if this native wild bird is here, then what else is here? You know, and there's more. So there's a next level and a next. So they're an invitation to really explore the natural world in our midst.
Well, maybe we can use them as the tool to go into further depth on that. And can you talk a bit about maybe weave some crow stories in there? Start out and talk about the food they eat and what they like. Because I think one of the experiences I regularly see is them hanging out near garbage cans, for instance, and tearing apart McDonald's bags to get whatever's left in there.
Right. Well, crows are omnivores, so they have a diet that is very that has a great deal of variety. So, left to their own devices, when they're not living next to humans, they eat a whole variety of things from nuts and berries to insect larvae, snails, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, living on the shores of Puget Sound, whatever invertebrates they can find, freshly dead fish that they could scavenge, snakes, lizards, eggs, baby birds. And just to note in turn, their young are also preyed upon by larger birds and raccoons. So it's not just that they're, the bad bird. So they have this rich and varied roadkill, dietary potential. When one of the things that makes them so successful living alongside humans as compared to other birds is that they can exploit so many different kinds of foods. So they can eat our refuse, basically. They can live close to our homes and they profit from our refuse. So it's true. You see these birds, crows sometimes in parking lots, and you think that they should look scruffy and horrible, and that it's the birds that live closer to wild places and down at the beach that should be beautiful. But I swear, the crows I see in the Target parking lot eating popcorn, I look at them and I think, gosh, you're good-looking birds. They're fat and shiny, and so they can exploit. McDonald's French fries, just whatever they can find. And they've definitely learned that they can dig through garbage cans to find food. And the lesson for us in living alongside crows is to put the lids on tight. I mean, one of the things we always complain about some of the damage done by wild animals that we live close to. So raccoons, dig through things. Coyotes, here in Seattle, we have a lot of coyotes eat our cats. Crows dig through the garbage. And I think to myself, if we are going to create a world in which wild animals can thrive, and I think that most of us want that, then in our everyday lives in the cities, we're going to have to be able to tolerate a little bit of discomfort and take some steps to make sure that we can live together well. So what that means is we put the lids on our garbage cans really tight, and we bring in our cats at night so the coyotes can't get them. And we realize that when things go wrong, it's our own, often it's our own lack of understanding of the way that wild animals live. So, I mean, we just have to sort of adjust if we want this rich, thriving, urban ecosystem. then we need to be able to tolerate a little discomfort and take some responsibility for our actions in the way that that will allow us to observe wildlife and to allow the wild animals their own lives. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
I have a good crow story about food, though. So this is one somebody else told me, and this is one of the things I like about crow stories is that they often kind of wind through, one person tells another person, just like any, good story should travel through this kind of lineage. So I heard at a reading, someone came up to me afterwards and told me about a crow that had enslaved a squirrel. So this was at a McDonald's again. And she said the squirrel was going down deeply into the garbage can where the crow couldn't go and bringing out French fries. And then as soon as the squirrel emerged with a French fry, the crow would sort of, attack the squirrel, not attack it, just, kind of buzz it and get the French fry from it. It would take the French fry and dip it in this little, canister of dipping sauce that someone had left. And I've seen crows do that and then eat it. And then, well, the poor squirrel sort of watched, thinking, will there be a crumb left for me? And then when it was done, the same thing would happen again. And over again, the squirrel would go in, bring a French fry, and the crow would get it, dip it, and eat it. I love it.
Now, do you think the crow picked up the dipping from observing others, or because they're very intelligent in terms of the use of tools?
That's right. And it seems that crows do learn by watching other animals. And it's hard. One of the things that we've seen is that crows drop snails here in the Pacific Northwest. It's snails and also nuts like chestnuts. In other parts of the world where there aren't, they don't live right on Puget Sound. Mostly we see crows dropping nuts into the road, not just to break them open, but to wait for cars to drive over them because they might not just break when they drop. Now, this is really interesting because we know gulls are a very intelligent group of birds, and they drop snails and other food to try to crack it open, but they haven't made the step of dropping it in the road to let something run over it. So it's hard to know exactly, did that behavior happen through trial and error, like they were dropping the nuts and just trying to get them to break. And then when a car came, they realized, oh, my goodness, that's, an amazing thing that happened. And then go from there and then learn it from other crows. So it's hard to, trace the lineage of certain behaviors. But, right, tool use is another one. And crows have been observed. So I think of using a car to run over your nut and snail as a form of tool use, right? Employing an intermediate something to get to attain your objective. But another one that we've seen crows doing is using sticks to push or encourage insects or spiders to emerge from a crevice in a fence or a log so that they can get them and eat them. So, yeah, all kinds of things like that.
And you even include in your book, Crow Planet, example of the crows using a crosswalk, a variation of putting things in the road theme.
Right. And that was some observation that was done in Tokyo, not by me, but it was made famous. It's on YouTube and the David Attenborough DVD on series on birds. And what happens there is that the crows drop their nuts in the road in these busy intersections in Tokyo. And the cars run over them and expose the nut meat for them. But the roads are so busy that the crows can't go get the nuts without being run over. So they stand on the side of the road with the pedestrians and they wait for the walk signal. And then they walk out and get their nuts and walk back to the edge, which is just stunning. And they must have observed, how the humans got across the road and thought it through. And so we're learning that crows are capable of problem solving with problems with multiple steps. Ravens can solve problems at an even higher level than crows. But yeah, crows can do kind of multiple step thinking, which is amazing.
Talk a bit about, again, one of your personal stories was with an injured crow, at least one injured crow. Talk about that and the concept of crow hospice.
Well, in the book, I talk about one particular injured crow, and it was a fledgling that jumped from the nest and before it could fly and injured its leg, which is not super uncommon. Most of them make it. Young birds they have a lot of cartilage, so their bones haven't completely ossified, so they're kind of a little spongier. And that's one of the reasons, because they jump from the nest, so their bones aren't that brittle and breakable until they're a little bit older. But this one definitely broke. I called it a her, but I had no way of knowing whether it was a male or female. Um, Really badly twisted the leg. And so, having done rehabilitation before, when I saw this little bird flopping around, it was just sort of without thought, even that I just scooped it up and brought it inside and gave it a good meal and splinted the leg. And then I started thinking, all right, this is ridiculous. There's one thing that's really important for crow life, and that is their social life. Any other wild bird at this stage, almost any other, I wouldn't have that many qualms about removing. Uh, I mean, it's hard. It's very, very hard to raise an injured bird. But as I said, I'd done it for. I was trained in it, and so splinting a bird's leg and feeding it for a while before it went out didn't seem like that big a deal to me. But in the case of a crow, it's much different. Crows that are raised by humans have a very, very short life, and the reason is that the crow social life is incredibly important to crow well-being, and this is another sign of their intelligence. They really share. Um, Knowledge about how to be a crow, and fitting in with a group of crows is very important to your survival. So they share information about food and roosts and social growth with one another. Their social system is quite advanced. And so when you take a crow out of that and raise it, it can't fit in, and one of its greatest survival structures is missing. And these crows tend to be killed by humans because they're too familiar with humans, or they don't have the advantages that the crows do have that are in with other crows, and so they have a very short life. And I thought, well, darn it, now this crow's got a broken leg. It's too young to really. I don't think its parents can properly take care of it when it really can't get around at all. But if I do let it go, if I don't let it, either way, it seemed like if I fix the leg, it's not going to be a good crow. If I let it go, it's going to die. And I just thought, you know what? I'm just gonna put it back out and see what happens. And I was really amazed that even though the adult crows had seen me take this crow, which is, an egregious crime in the, crow human relations. If you've ever come too close to a young crow, you know that you're going to get dive bombed and scolded. And that's about the only time of year that crows do dive bomb and scold us, is that time when they've got nests and chicks, and they're very vulnerable. So they're just being protective, not mean when they do that to us. So I expected that I was going to be attacked by these birds when I made sure that the adults were watching, so they knew where I was putting the bird. But they didn't, and they never did. And they continued to care for this bird throughout the year, and the bird's leg never healed, but it still lives in the neighborhood, and I can identify her by the way she roosts, kind of sideways, since she can't stand on that one leg. Um, but got by. So it's a lovely instance of. I mean, I don't know what happened in terms of the adults not attacking and scolding me, and it's hard not to think that, gosh, is our guardedness between species somehow. I mean, are there moments when that breaks down and some kind of communication takes place? Um, but you asked about crow hospice, and that's another dimension. I've passed crows on the side of the road where there's an injured crow or a young crow that was possibly hit by a car and has been there for some time and is starving and near death. And these birds are often surrounded by a group of crows, probably in their family and extended family. And they're just being with the crow, maybe making an effort at feeding it, but they have had to be hanging out there for a long time because most of the crows that I examine in these situations are, they're really dehydrated and really ill. And so I think of that, yeah, as you said, Mike, as a crow hospice, where just like in a human hospice, we're invited to just be with, you know, um, someone in our circle who is near death.
Talk a little bit more about the crow communities, because oftentimes we'll see crows in both situations as individuals or maybe with
Mhm.
their partner doing stuff. But then you can also see very large gatherings of crows in trees.
Right. And that's just part of the seasonal cycle of crow life. So if you think about spring, crows are breaking up, and that's early spring in crow language. So late February, early March, crows are breaking up into pairs and are beginning their nests and the nesting process. So after they have their young, they live in these family groups for much of the summer. So just the two adults and whatever young they manage to fledge. And the nests are usually small. You only end up with one or two young crows that make it. And another really interesting phenomenon about crows is that they don't breed until they're 3 or 4 years old. And we do know that some of these young birds that are, they're not babies anymore, but they're not ready to breed. Sometimes a cousin or young from the previous year will help at the nest. So they'll help the parents birds at the nest. And what we've learned is rather than actually helping these young to do better, the young that the nest that they're helping, what happens instead is that the helpers, when they go to nest, are more successful. So they learn from watching successful adults. They learn how to be nesters, which is pretty darn amazing and advanced for bird social life. And we don't even see that really in just about any of the intelligent mammal or animals other than humans, this idea of helpers. So anyway, after the breeding season is over and the young are out of the nest, grown up, fending for themselves, much like they are now. Now they're still young. They're making that kind of long, annoying cawing sound. They're still begging for food, but the parents are ignoring them more and more. Those family groups break down and they're joining into the family groups join with other family groups and social groups. And so we're starting to see those great autumn flocks that are just going to get bigger and bigger until in later, deeper into autumn and winter, we see these really enormous flocks that are, in a way, they're a kind of protection for the birds. So, they can alert one another to the presence of predators such as hawks. They can, again, kind of regroup as a social group and share information, find food together. They'll kind of break apart during the day and then come home and come to roost again in the evening. So that's just in a very kind of superficial way, the crow year.
So when they're roosting, are they just basically all sitting together in a tree or something else and sleeping?
Yeah, that's right. They come together at night, and they do. It's really interesting. They'll be very loud because as they're coming together, they're kind of communicating about where they are and where they're all going. And it'll become quiet. This kind of cacophony of crow calls will become quieter and quieter until there are these little crow whispers that are very, I think of it as pillow talk because it's very, it sounds very intimate and kind of murmuring. And it's just like a human family at night, sort of calming down and talking to the children. And then yes, they fall asleep and in the morning again start with these little crow murmurs and then burst into this great cacophony again as they fly into the day.
We are talking with Lyanda Lynn Haupt, who is author of Crow Planet, Essential Wisdom from the Urban Wilderness. And in addition to your book, you also have a website that people can go to?
I do. My website that has information about my talks is at lyandalynhaupt.com. But I also have a blog that's a lot of fun. It's called The Tangled Nest, and it's at thetanglednest.com. And it explores these ways that we can, through our households, through the places that we live, connect with the more than human wild world with which we live.
Very good. Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Thank you, Mike. My pleasure.
Again, just talking with Lyanda Lynn Haupt, and you can find out more via her website, thetanglednest.com, or via her new book, Crow Planet, Essential Wisdom from the Urban Wilderness.